Hi, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for having me. I'd like to share with you about UEBT and ethical sourcing. I'll just put my screen here in slideshow mode, and we'll get started. So UEBT is an international nonprofit. Our vision is a world in which all people and biodiversity thrive, and our mission is to regenerate nature and secure a better future, focusing on ethical sourcing of natural raw materials, what we call ingredients from biodiversity. We have been around a little over almost 15 years now, I guess. And we are a membership organization, and I'm going to share with you in a moment who our members are and what they have to do to be part of our coalition of committed companies. And what we do is we work to support those member companies in their pathway to sourcing with respect for people and biodiversity. So we do a few different things. We do raise awareness on how companies can source with respect for people and biodiversity. We provide a number of resources. We do implement a standard, and that standard is developed through a public consultation process, and we verify and certify sourcing practices in line with that standard. We also offer resources for companies that want to focus on risk management or due diligence, or that want to focus on specific biodiversity actions in a specific supply chain, focus on one ingredient or place. And we also work around access and benefit sharing. So the requirements that a company may need to follow related to the Nagoya Protocol. We do verification and certification. As I said, I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And we provide a wide range of advisory and support services on all of these issues. We also have some working groups where we work among companies in a sort of pre-competitive way on some serious issues in some specific supply chains. We have a couple of those that we're running now. One is in carnaúba wax in Brazil, and I'll say a few words about that at the end, in case there are members of ICATA that are interested in joining that and that are sourcing carnaúba. Our focus is a very specific one. We call it ingredients from biodiversity, but what we're talking about more technically are the natural raw materials, the botanical ingredients. So not the big commodities like coffee or tea or cocoa, but the roots, the spices, the barks, the flowers, all the different plant parts that go into sectors such as beauty, personal care, functional foods, herbs and spices, and natural pharmaceuticals. I mentioned we do have a standard, the ethical BIOTRADE standard, or we call it just the UEBT standard. It's made up of 7 principles, 2 of which are very focused on biodiversity conservation, so the environmental side, but with a very strong focus on biodiversity. And the other 5 principles are focused on all number of social issues, from worker rights to living income to land rights to the access and benefit sharing piece, rights of indigenous people, child rights, etc. And we work with different organizations in different parts of the supply chain. And so the standard applies to the sourcing areas, but it can apply to the smallholders, medium or large farms, processing companies, etc. And we focus on both cultivation and wild collection of these various materials. This shows our reach in the world, currently working with almost 400 ingredients that we certify or verify, but also working on a number of improvements with members in more than 900 supply chains. We currently have just 90 members. We've just reached 90 members this month. And we work in a little more than 80 countries where our members are sourcing materials. Here's our members. I think this shows almost all of them. It may be missing. Nope, we do have Claren, which is our latest member, and 90 of them active. And you can see there's a number of large brands like Guerlain and Christian Dior, Parfum, and Yves Rocher, and Weleda, but also a lot of manufacturers, processing companies, and even small organizations in the sourcing areas. So our members have to do things to become members, and they have to show continued progress. In general, there are 5 big commitments they have to make. They have to assess their sourcing and set set a strategy in place, set of policies and practices around their sourcing. They have to set meaningful targets to continuously improve and make them time bound. They have to agree to manage risks, so doing due diligence on the natural raw materials, and we're really pushing companies to do this sort of work across the entire portfolio. Then we also require them to also promote positive impact in at least a prioritized set of ingredients. So this is where they'd actually do some really specific impact related work. This may be that they go for UEBT certification. It may be that they work on biodiversity action plans, things like this. And then we ask them to report on their progress and to communicate that. There is a membership process. Again, it's open to all different kinds of companies in the supply chain, from farms to large brands, multinational brands. They go through an application process. We do a desktop assessment of the company level. This isn't the same as the certification work on the ground in the sourcing areas, but we do look at some minimum requirements such as child labor, human rights, no deforestation. So we do this at a desktop basis. And then we ask them to put in place a work plan along the lines of those commitments we were talking about, where they set the targets and they look at what they're going to do over the next 3 years. And then UEBT has to approve that work plan. We make sure it's ambitious enough, and then they're allowed to become a member. There are dues for that. It's based on the size of the company, and it's capped. And there's also, for some very smaller companies, there's a different sort of more integrated membership process that makes it a little easier for them. And as members, obviously they are part of this group of committed companies and part of a movement around business for biodiversity, but there's a clear pathway to achieve more ethical sourcing of their ingredients for biodiversity, and a pathway that's backed up by an independent nonprofit and an international standard, an internationally recognized sustainability standard, which is the ethical BIOTRADE standard, and lots of access to resources and support, a help desk on access and benefit sharing, advisory services, lots of different interesting training programs and different other programs for improving sourcing. And then of course, joining some of the working groups. The Carnaúba working group that I'll mention in a little bit does not require UEBT membership for purchasers of Carnaúba to join that working group. So a little bit more about what is sourcing with respect. Well, we see it as a pathway. So at first, you really are talking about managing risk and reducing harm in your portfolio of ingredients you're sourcing. And we're developing a risk tool for the sectors we work in. And this is really so companies can respond to the rise of requirements around due diligence, and also for the membership requirements that we put in place. So this involves a risk database, which is sharing public information at the country level, but it's also we've been gathering information from our various work in the field in these different materials. So we'll be providing risk information at the level of the actual natural raw material in a number of categories you see on the right side of your screen. We're also working then on a supplier due diligence tool, and this is rolling out now. This is an online platform where you can send your suppliers tier 1, tier 2, but also questions around the field and farm level area on a number of requirements that are backed up by our standard and that go as far as to the field level. So that particular piece is what makes it very different from a lot of other due diligence tools, is that we also incorporate the UEBT critical requirements at the field or farm level on wild collection and cultivation practices. It also includes the major requirements around deforestation, human rights, child labor, and those kinds of things. So this is something we're rolling out now. It'll be on a subscription basis with our members receiving preferential rates, but it'll also be, I think, open to non-members as well. Now, if we think continuing on the pathway and going into something that is more independently assured, we offer field verification. So this is where our own experts go out and validate supply chain practices against the requirements in the standard. And this is not a compliance-based certification with a consumer-facing claim or label. It really is about improvements. It is done by UEBT and not by an external certification body, so it's not quite the same as certification in that way. But it really is about finding the gaps, learning and improving. There are some limited text claims you can make. And we also offer sort of two levels of the assessments. We look at everything, and a supply chain can reach what we call the responsible sourcing level, which means that they're doing a lot to manage risks and there's no significant bad practices. There's due diligence being reached. Or they can reach a higher level, which is the ethical sourcing, meaning they're really meeting, all of those critical requirements, and there's positive impact that's happening there. So there's some flexibility in verification, although limited claims, and it can be done in a slightly more improvement-focused way. And for a lot of companies, that really fits their strategy. We also offer a more traditional certification, which involves claims and labeling that can be used in consumer-facing marketing or even on pack with additional requirements. And this is a very structured process. It's about compliance. So it is more that you have to meet that and you are certified, or you go back and you improve until you can reach that level. It is done against the UEBT full standard, so that high level we were talking about in verification, but the audit is done by an external certification body that then makes a decision independently from UEBT, and then UEBT validates that decision. There's a certificate issued that is put public on our website, and then consumer-facing claims are allowed because you have that more structured level of compliance there. And this is where labeling, and you see the labels that are possible based on different programs that we offer. We have 3 different certification programs. I'm not going to go into detail in those 3 programs, but of course, if this is interesting, you can always reach out to us for more information. And then as an add-on, with or without certification, is our work on biodiversity action plans. And we're doing a bunch of these. We are working on 30 or 40 of these right now, trying to get up to 100 of them in the next couple of years, working with companies all over the world to really take specific action on biodiversity in a specific supply chain. And we're writing up a lot of case studies. You can see how this works and how they develop it and what are some of the challenges. They're all different because they're very locally specific and specific to the actual supply chain. So if this is interesting to you, this is another thing we do at UEBT. We do it a lot with our members, and with a lot of them, it's something they're doing alongside the other programs. I'll just show you very quickly, UEBT is an organization that offers assurance of practices through using claims and labels. At the bottom of this pyramid, if you think of this as kind of a hierarchy of the claims and the labels you can use, our members are able to make claims about being a member. And we offer a membership logo, which is this logo you see at the bottom. It's allowed to be used off-pack and as a signature to the brand. So this is not something you'd ever see associated with an ingredient or a product, but you could say, Leda is a member of UEBT, and put that in social media or on a corporate type of communication. Then in our verification program, we allow text claims. And then in our certification programs, and that's the top part here, we offer different labels that have the ingredient name on top, both off-pack and then with some extra requirements around the company sourcing system. We do allow some labeling on-pack with some additional requirements that is also even allowed on the front of the pack. So obviously for us, the more you are doing, the more assurance and impact and more coverage of what's inside that product is where we allow more labeling that is consumer facing and that is at the point of purchase, so on the pack. These are some of the examples of the on-pack labeling. Natura's Ecos line is UEBT certified, Waleda and Native, and there's many others in the pipeline working on this. And finally, I just want to mention UEBT also works really outside of everything we just talked about on very special issues in working groups. Right now, our most active working group is on carnaúba wax in Brazil. And as you may know, there are significant social challenges, particularly around worker rights in the carnaúba supply chain in northeastern Brazil. There have been media reports in recent years about very bad practices being found equivalent to modern slavery. There's also biodiversity challenges. This is a very important ecoregion. The Caatinga biome and the carnaúba palm that you see here is an endemic species, very important to the communities, but also very much a challenging situation because there's a significant invasive species that's a problem. The wax is actually collected from the wild, so they extract the palm and they beat it in a machine, and then the powder that comes off the palm leaves is what's processed into the wax. And the carnaúba wax, if you know this material, it's used, it's a very efficient wax in terms of its glossiness and its special qualities. And it's used in everything from lipstick to car wax. And it's, many companies are supplying it. It's even used as a coating instead of plastic on, for example, wood products. And so really important product, but it really only comes from this part of the world, and there's really significant challenges. So we started the working group a few years ago. I'll show you. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead. These are the current members of the working group. So it's international brands and manufacturers. So these are purchasers of carnaúba wax, but we also have as members some of the wax processing companies in Brazil, such as Agrocera and Brasil Ceras. And what we do is we essentially are creating a preferential supplier program. So giving support to the carnaúba processing companies that are making these improvements in these issues, and in particular in the living and working conditions of the workers that are doing the extraction of the carnaúba, but also on biodiversity projects. So the supplier program, those members that I just showed, they have made a set of commitments to source carnaúba where these improvement practices are in place. And in the most recent year or so of this working group, they've also made commitments that they will source from certain supply chains where the carnaúba has been verified to a recognized sustainability standard. And right now, UEBT standard is one of those standards, and then there's another standard that we've deemed as sufficient and equivalent as well. So there's some choices there, there's some flexibility, but the idea being that there needs to be these improvements happening, and it needs to be verified independently, and that these companies will not source unless those things are in place. So this is ongoing. We welcome others to join, and we're really trying to lift a very challenging sector and remove some of those worst practices by showing there's real demand from the international side and support for that, so that those wax processing companies in Brazil feel supported to be able to make those improvements. And it's a very complex supply chain, so it's probably too much to go into in this short video. If you're interested in that, please go to our website. The easiest way to reach us overall is at info@uebt.org. That goes to a few of us in the organization, and then we will direct you, whether it's certification, verification, or you're interested in membership, or you're interested in just the Carnauba working group. There are also lots and lots of our services that are available to non-members, especially on the risk and the due diligence side, as well as on advisory and support on specific issues and on the working group in Carnauba. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this was interesting, and we hope to hear from many of you. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that you might have. And thank you again for your time. Bye-bye.